Let's take a look at the grid option in GardenCAD. I'm using GardenCAD here on a Mac, but the principles here are the same whether you're using it on a Mac or on a Windows machine. I've opened a drawing you'll find in the Jobs folder. It's a sample drawing called Dylan Classroom. And you notice when you pull it up, as I've done here, that the grid shows. There's a small step marked by the single point, and then a cross makes the major point. So if you look across to the right, you have a major grid point there, another major grid point there in the middle of the screen, and another major grid point here, and minor grid points between them. I can turn the grid on and off with the F7 function key, and on a Mac I've got to hold the function key down on the keyboard and press F7. On a Windows machine it's just press F7. So I can toggle the grid, I can turn it on and off with that function key. But if I right click on the desktop and go to drafting aids, you'll see here that the grid is set at a 500mm. So we're working here in the metric system on a 500mm grid. So each one of these tiny dot points is 500mm apart. You'll notice you can set the grid as an eccentric grid. It could be 500 and then 250. And the bold steps are 10. So every 10 points we get the major grid, and the minor grid is a 500mm grid. So the major grid is a 5-meter grid. Now, you can make GardenCAD snap to those grid points if you want, but you'll find in the GardenCAD environment, unless you pick up a drawing like this where the grid has been set, you'll find that the grid defaults to a value of 1. So let's go to Drafting CADs again, and let's take this off, and we'll put a value of 1 and a value of 1 there, and we'll go OK. You notice the grid doesn't seem to be there until we zoom right in so tight. It's a bit jerky here on the Mac, and as we go further and further and further in, you should see it appearing in a minute. There it is there. There's the grid, because it's only a 1mm grid. I'll right click and zoom extents. So a 1mm grid here is not a sensible value. So it takes a little bit of time to get used to the grid settings. They're there all the time. It's just that you control the density of the grid by the drafting aids setting.